Hey everyone, Jack here again. Jack, Soldier on the Path, and we are on day 7 of our consecration to St. Joseph. And this particular one was a cool topic because this related a lot more to St. Joseph's consecration to Mary, and effectively how reflecting on how St. Joseph was the person that was devoted to Mary. And in a sense, too, how no one is more devoted to Mary than Saint Joseph himself. And I suppose I don't want to get necessarily into a theological argument here that I'm sure Jesus was very devoted to Mary as well. But Saint Joseph really is the best example of like true devotion from a spouse to another spouse, because he was ultimately the one that was protecting and taking care of Mary. Now, unfortunately, I recorded a video a little bit earlier and I've been having a little bit of trouble. I'm kind of new to making all this stuff and the video got a little messed up. So I'm going to try to call back a few of the particular topics that I originally had in that take. And one that just kind of came back to me on this is how St. Joseph was a really great practical example of what it means to be a devoted spouse, a devoted husband, a devoted partner. Now, this is where I don't necessarily have a ton of experience to speak too deeply into this because I'm single. I haven't necessarily even been in a long-term relationship ever. And so a lot of I'm not necessarily speaking from experience when I'm talking about this, which actually I think is probably a good aspect of a reflection for this particular video, because St. Joseph is a great model of somebody to focus on and to model after in a relationship. St. Joseph is the best example of somebody that went through sacrifice in order to be the best spouse to Mary. And in consecrating ourselves to St. Joseph, we're also consecrating ourselves to our spiritual mortal father here on earth, similar to how consecrating ourselves to Mary is another modality. And I suppose I'm not even going to get too into that because I've never done the consecration to Mary. The reason that I think St. Joseph is especially a pretty cool thing to reflect on and to consecrate ourselves to is because St. Joseph was a mortal being. He was a practical person here on earth. And praying to God is certainly a great way to get the graces of God, because God is, all knowing, all powerful. There's nothing that God can't do. Praying to Jesus is also obviously a phenomenal thing to be doing. Jesus is God. He's the Son of God. He is all powerful as well and all holy. I think St. Joseph is a really, really great person to reflect on, though, and to pray to in particular as a man, because St. Joseph was the paternal holy part of the Holy Family. St. Joseph was the one that kind of had to do like the practical things on earth. Another thing I said in my other video that I'm kind of just pulling into this is sometimes, I guess, myself reflecting, praying to God and Jesus, while super important, sometimes feels a little too out there for the things that I'm praying for. And those things are more, I suppose, I'm not necessarily a monk. I am not a clergyman. I'm a 30-year-old guy in New York City. I have to pay my rent. I have to be disciplined. And I'm not trying to say that praying to God and Jesus are a bad thing here. I think those are all super important. The reason that St. Joseph in particular is kind of speaking to me on this is because he's the best example of what it means to be a practical, sacrificing man on earth today. St. Joseph was the one that was putting food on the table for Mary and Jesus. He was the one that was providing shelter and paying the bills effectively. Like, I don't think Mary was necessarily had a part-time job at Trader Joe's. You know what I mean? Like, she being all holy and taking care of Jesus in the maternal way, St. Joseph had to be the one focused on all of the other practical things that we kind of have to do and rely on as men and playing our role and God's given role to us. So that's why I think St. Joseph is a great person to kind of reflect on and to lean on for those particular challenges and sacrifices that we experience as young men and old men, men, period. Fellas, the other aspects of this that I think are cool on this particular day, because again, as I kind of mentioned, day 7 is really focused on St. Joseph's devotion to Mary and how he is the one consecrated to Mary. This all relates to how we respect, honor, and love our spouses, whether that's in committed marriage or working towards marriage with your girlfriend, fiance, wife, partner. St. Joseph is the best example of true commitment to that spouse and true sacrifice to that spouse. And there's even another extra layer into this. And I guess before I'll go into that extra layer, I'll kind of round out the topic of St. Joseph is a great person to call on strength if maybe you're having trouble in your relationship or you want to grow your relationship more. For me, not being in a relationship, I am focusing and consecrating a lot of my energy and trying to pull some grace from St. Joseph on how I can develop myself to be the best partner that I can possibly be in order to sacrifice for that partner and then to grow my own family and using the Holy Family as a model there. St. Joseph is a phenomenal model for that Holy Family because he was the one that did all the sacrifice to do so. Okay, we've talked a lot about that on a couple of these videos, but this particular day is all about his devotion to Mary and how there's a kind of a funny line that I read in how there's a lot of saints, popes, people that consecrate themselves to Mary and focus a lot on Mary. Saint Joseph is more devoted and consecrated to Mary than anybody on earth, living or dead, combined, because he was the holy spouse to Mary. So this is again a really good model, not necessarily speaking from like, hey, this is how I'm interacting with my particular spouse here, but how I should model that and have that focus for when that comes in the right timing for me. Another aspect of this, and this is more of the Catholic tradition, but I think that it can be applied to the general temptations that are a lot around us in 2025. This is June 2020, July 2025 that I'm recording this. Joseph also was chaste. Joseph also has effectively was a virgin, just like Mary was. As Catholics believe, Mary's virginity was her entire existence. And so, by that, if we're going off of that, and Joseph being her devoted spouse, the same thing with Joseph. I think this is also a really, really important thing to reflect on as well, because sex can be really, really emphasized in relationships. And sometimes that can be um, almost overly emphasized. And while in a marriage relationship, as Catholics believe, but I still think even just in like a committed relationship too, sometimes we put too much stock into sex. And again, using Saint Joseph as a really good example, if you feel you're kind of tempted by that too much, or you feel like that has too much of a grip on your life, or you're putting too much emphasis on it, maybe you're, in a sense, worshiping a false idol, using that as an example. St. Joseph can be a great person to try to kind of pull some graces from in that aspect. I suppose this is another really great example, too, in his devotion to Mary, how you can continue to be devoted to your spouse and not be tempted by those types of things in other people. So this is, I suppose, going into like adultery and considering being unfaithful to your spouse you can really lean on St. Joseph here in the sense of St. Joseph had the ultimate strength of chastity and praying to him for things like that, even in a committed relationship with Mary. So oftentimes especially I guess for guys, but for girls too, a lot of times why relationships might kind of go sideways or break down is by being unfaithful in a sexual type way. So in order to try to gather some strength outside of that temptation, St. Joseph is a great person to pray to on that front as well. So again, kind of rounding out the focus of today, St. Joseph being a great example of really divine consecration to his spouse, being Mary, and also being strong in his convictions of protecting the family, providing for the family. And there's kind of a line in here too of St. Joseph being, Mary's strong knight, her protector. It's a sort of a reason why we have this like soldier on the path framework for this channel. We're all soldiers. We're all trying to stay on this righteous path. And soldiers, protectors, knights, warriors, we all have to remain disciplined and not fall into temptation that could weaken us for, when those spiritual battles do come up. I know myself, I, struggle with those all the time. And so this is also just a good exercise for myself, reflection and inner strengthening. So with that, practicing with my little microphone too, I'll read through the day 7 consecration here. So, day 7, Holy Mary, pray for us. All Christians belong to St. Joseph because Jesus and Mary belong to them. From St. Leonard Port Maurice. You belong to Jesus. He wants to grow in virtue and holiness, that is, in true love of God and neighbor. To make this happen, you must imitate Jesus. In particular, the best way is to imitate his total entrustment to Mary and St. Joseph. Jesus is not offended when people entrust themselves to Mary and Joseph. How could he be? He is the first one to have entrusted himself to them. He, more than anyone else, wants you to love Mary and St. Joseph. He wants you to love them and resemble them. What brother would be offended if his younger siblings expressed reverence toward their mother and father? What man would be upset if another person wrote a song about his mother or placed roses at her feet? Likewise, what son would be disturbed if someone praised the virtues of his father? A person who honored a father would not receive condemnation from the father's son. On the contrary, such a person would receive praise and tremendous favors from the son. Well, this is exactly what Jesus stands ready to do for those who honor Mary and St. Joseph. Jesus will give them everything. Jesus stands ready to give you everything. Now, if a son is willing to give gifts to the persons who honors his father and mother, what kind of gifts would a husband give to the person who honors his wife? All we have to do is look to St. Joseph to find out. St. Joseph will empty the treasure of heaven for those who honor Mary, his wife. St. Joseph will greatly bless those who love and honor Mary. The Virgin Mary is St. Joseph's wife, his queen, and the delight of his heart. She was the only woman who could satisfy his chaste heart. This is a really cool topic on the chastity aspect where Mary still completely satisfied Joseph in chastity. So there's not even sex in this scenario, and he's still totally satisfied by Mary. I think that's a really important thing that we should strive for in all our relationships. I'm not saying sex is a bad thing. I'm just saying that it's not the only thing. And if we can really deepen our relationships with our spouse outside of sex and not being so sex crazed, there's such more of like a depth of partnership and consecration in each other outside of that. And we can use St. Joseph and Mary as a really good example for that. As Adam was not fulfilled until he rested in a creature similar to himself, Eve, Joseph not only found rest when he found Mary, Joseph only found rest when he found Mary. That's what I meant to say. When he took Mary's hand in marriage, he consecrated himself to her and made a promise to treasure her femininity especially her blessed virginity. He was her beloved provider, protector, and servant. Again, great things. Like this is hard as a man to do, but we can use Joseph as a really, really great example for this and something that we can lean on when things get a little bit tough, just being human beings. St. Joseph earnestly desires for her husband to be honored by everybody. St. Joseph earnestly desires for her to be honored and loved by everybody. St. Joseph wants you to honor Mary. If you honor Mary, Joseph's Joseph's gonna be like, cool, thanks for honoring my wife, man. Appreciate it. St. Joseph will increase your love for the Virgin Mary. St. Joseph was so in love with Mary that he wants everybody to acknowledge her beauty. What husband would not want this for his wife? Doesn't every husband desire for his wife to be loved and honored by others? What husband would not do everything in his power to increase the reverence shown to his bride? If you allow St. Joseph to increase your love for his queen, he will empty the treasures of heaven for you. He has access to all those treasures of heaven. So again, St. Joseph, pretty cool guy. You know, cool guy. Consecration to St. Joseph will make you a knight of the Holy Queen. St. Joseph knows that Mary is worth living for, fighting for, and dying for. She is the queen of the kingdom of heaven. To fight for her is to fight for the king. St. Joseph, the most valiant of knights, knows that the surest, easiest, and fastest way to the king is through the queen. His mission is to reveal this truth to souls. So I think that's another like really cool way to think about the Holy Family and just to St. Joseph in general. How God is the king, Mary is the queen, St. Joseph is the knight. I think that's another kind of cool way to like get through like the obviously a little bit confusing aspect of like, well, Joseph was Jesus's stepfather, foster father, father, like not the father, like so, and because there's God the Father. That's a pretty cool way to think about it in the sense of God is the king, Mary is the queen. So that's how we kind of have that like holy alignment there. And Joseph is the knight, the protector, the provider. Kind of cool. Um, so his mission is to reveal the truth to souls. Sorry, just adjusting the mic there. So again, his mission is to reveal the truth to souls. Just like us, soldiers on the path, we have a mission. We have to complete that mission, that vocation, just like a knight, just like a soldier. For her part, Mary has full confidence in the chivalrous love of St. Joseph, her knight. She completely trusts him. St. Joseph will teach you how to be a knight for the Holy Queen as well, making you capable of conquering the hearts of the kingdom of heaven. For the kingdom of heaven. Conquering hearts for the kingdom of heaven. It's kind of a cool note too, especially as just like a single guy there. He will teach you how to be a knight of the Holy Queen. So obviously how to be a knight of Mary. I think we can also think of this as knights for our own queen, for our own partners here on earth, our own girlfriends and wives. Consecrating ourselves to St. Joseph will give us the graces to be capable of conquering hearts for the kingdom of heaven. Pretty cool. I guess they can also be conquering hearts like of men in a good way, like for the greater glory of God. I suppose this is another like way that we got to be careful. Like this is not something that we want to be like selfishly trying to use Saint Joseph for like selfish desires of the flesh. But I think in just thinking about more as like how we're using these strengths as virtues and using the virtues of Saint Joseph in divine partnership with a partner here on earth. Kind of cool. Okay, so rounding this out with Blessed William Joseph Chaminade, and then we got another line from Blessed Bartolo Longo. So the first one is, a servant of Mary will have a tender devotion to Saint Joseph, and by his pious homage of respect and love will endeavor to merit the protection of this great saint. Last one, this is Blessed Bartolo Longo. Oh my, oh my dear Father, Saint Joseph, I want to love you. I want to love you with the love that Mary has for you. Because obviously Mary loved St. Joseph very much. So very cool. All right, soldiers, that wraps up day 7 of our consecration to St. Joseph. Thanks so much for helping out with a few more of our little technical things that we're working on here with a little mic action. And yeah, just pray for me that I can not have any more issues with these videos corrupting when I when I save them. So I hope this one works out. Talk to y'all soon. See you tomorrow.